Corned beef is a heavily spiced and cured beef brisket that was traditionally preserved with large corn kernel-sized grains of salt, hence the name corned beef. That's right, corned beef has literally nothing to do with corn, it gets its name from salt. Corned beef actually has quite a lengthy history, but long story short, corned beef became a pretty popular export in 17th century Ireland due to the country's abundance of cattle and access to cheap salt. Now, when I think about corned beef, I think less about salt and more about a sandwich on rye bread stacked to the heavens with thinly sliced corned beef, cheese, mustard, the whole thing. That or a classic plate of sliced corned beef with the cabbage, the potatoes, the carrots, that sort of thing. Whichever way you decide to serve this glorious, beautiful hunk of pink buff, it can be crafted at home. All you need is a brisket, a handful of spices, a little bit of curing salt, and a positive tude. I already mentioned it, but corned beef is heavily spiced, and things that are heavily spiced need spices. I know there's a lot going on here, so don't worry, these will be listed in the description. Into a pan over medium heat go our caraway seeds, star anise, allspice, juniper berries, cloves, brown mustard seeds, coriander seed, black peppercorn, red chili flake, whole mace, you can also use ground, and lastly a few bay leaves and a stick of cinnamon. Then just slosh that all around over medium heat, and toasting spices unlocks much of their natural aromatic compounds, so after a few minutes, once your entire kitchen smells like a spice shop, remove them from the heat and transfer them to a blender. Now go back and forth between pulsing the blender a few times and shaking it like so. We're going for a coarse spice mixture, so don't completely obliterate these. Once you got something like that, go ahead and store these in a sealable container or jar. Set those aside, we're gonna use them in a bit. Okay, let's talk buff. The flat is a cut of brisket with the point removed, and that's exactly what this is. Most chain markets sell brisket already butchered like this, but if you need to ask for one, just ask for the flat. This guy was around 8 pounds, so I cut it in half so it could fit in the container easier. To turn this brisket into corned beef, we need to brine it, which is really just a fancy way of saying let it soak in a sugary, salty, spiced water for about a week, give or take. If you are cooking along, the steps to measure the salt, sugar, and curing salt are in the description below. To weigh the salt and the sugar, we need to weigh the weight of the water, which is exactly why I weighed the container first. I like to use brown sugar, either dark or light, it really doesn't matter, and just plain old kosher salt. Now all we need to do is mix everything together and boom, that's the brine. Well, actually it's more like a cure and brine. You know, a brine's just sort of a type of cure in a sense, but yeah. Once that's incorporated, grab the spice mix that we just made and add half of it to the water. We're going to reserve the other half to finish the corned beef later on. Now it's time for pink salt, aka Prague powder number 1. Okay, so real quick, this is pink salt. We've used this on the channel before. It's made for curing meats. It's normal table salt mixed with a small percentage of sodium nitrite. In high masses and high volumes, this can be actually lethal. But don't worry, we're not using nearly enough for it to be lethal. That being said, it is important that we measure out the precise amount that we are going to need. To get the correct amount of pink salt that you're gonna use for this, I'm actually gonna put all the information below, but essentially you're gonna go by the weight of the brisket itself, not the water. Cool, you heard the man. Pop the pink salt right into the brine and once again stir it up. Part 1 is pretty much complete. All we need to do now is lower the brisket into the brine and let it do its thing in the fridge for 7 to 10 days. I like to weigh things down to make sure everything stays submerged in the brine, and also the brine time is going to depend on the size of the brisket, but 7 days is a safe bet. As the brisket cures, make sure to stir it once per day until we finish it. This is to make sure that the salts and sugar are evenly distributed in the liquid and that the brisket's just sort of getting adequate love from all sides. Remove the container from the fridge and mix the brine up a bit. I also like to do what's called the beef plunger to make sure that the cure is even, but that's optional. Actually, just kidding, not optional. You must plunge your beef. But for real, you don't need to go nuts when mixing, just enough to kick up some of the brine. Alright, about a week has passed, time flies. By day 7, the curing salts should have had enough time to penetrate the meat, and we are now ready to cook. But before doing so, go ahead and rinse that brisket off with some cold water under the sink, just wash that extra brine off. Notice how the color of the brisket has changed from a brownish to a bright pink. That's good, that means the cure worked. It is a fish. I think it's safe to start referring to this brisket as corned beef. Go ahead and strain the spices out of that brine. Their work here is done. You can toss them. The brisket comes from the chest of the animal and is considered a tough cut, meaning that we need to cook it at low temperatures for a long time to make it tender. We're going to start the corned beef in a large salted pot of boiling water, then reduce the heat to a simmer and cook it covered for 3 to 4 hours, or really until you can easily stick it with a fork. Lower the beef into the water, then grab the spice mix from last week and dump the rest of it in with the corned beef. Give that a slight mixy, then the lid goes on, the heat turns down, and we walk away for a couple hours. About 2.5 hours into the cooking process, we can start the veggies. Here I have a classic medley of red potatoes, carrots, and green cabbage. I really dig red potatoes here because of their waxy nature. It allows them to hold their shape in the water after being boiled. Carefully lower those veggies in with the corned beef, then let those simmer and cook for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. If you time this right, the veggies should be done when the beef is. When your timer goes off, take out all those vegetables and set them aside. You'll know when they're done when you can poke them with something with zero resistance. Yeah, those are nice. Ooh, yeah. Look at that. Ooh. Have you ever seen a man so stoked on beef? Only on this channel, my friends, only here. When things cool off a bit, go ahead and cut those veggies up in any way that you see fit. As for the beef, you have a couple options, but no matter which road you take, be sure to slice against the muscle grain, which in brisket, luckily, is very easy to identify. I'm making a classic Americano St. Patrick's Day style plate, so I'm cutting hearty slices, but you can also slice thin for sandwiches if you want. Have you ever seen a more beautiful meat accordion? And there she blows. It doesn't get much more classic than this, my people. I like to finish this corned beef with some nice crunchy salt for texture, black pepper, and a few drizzles of melted butter just over the vegetables. And it goes without saying, some super bad homemade stout mustard. Corned beef without mustard is just, it's not okay. Yeah, that looks about right. Oh, and of course, if you are of age, a nice dark beer, extra puntos if it's Guinness. Corned beef as we know it today is surprisingly kind of American. When corned beef was first produced, many Irish citizens could not afford the stuff, couldn't bring it home to their families. Most of it was exported to wealthier countries. After the Great Irish Potato Famine of the 1840s, many Irish people immigrated to the US where they were able to earn more money than their, friends back home. With these new earnings, Irish American people were able to buy corned beef once again, you guessed it, from Jewish kosher butchers in the same area. Yes, brisket is a kosher cut of meat, so, it worked out for both the Jews and the Irish, I guess. The brisket-loving Jewish and Irish immigrants both had a lot in common. They were both booted from their homeland, they were both highly discriminated against in the US, they both took a chance coming to the New World, and I guess they both appreciated a good sando. My people. Just think about the anatomy of a corned beef sandwich here for a second. You got Jewish rye bread stacked with Irish thinly sliced corned beef, then you got your German mustard, maybe a Polish pickle. So, yeah, the classic corned beef sandwich that we all know and love borrows from a ton of different cultures, which is pretty much just about as American as it gets. Cool. Alright, that's enough beef theory from me today. Thank you so much for tuning in, for beefing it up with your boyo, and I will see you wonderful, wonderful human beings next week. Thanks for watching. Later.